Give to your PBS station and help create a future of endless possibilities for everyone.
Wyoming PBS, in partnership with Wyoming Public Media and the Wyoming Business Report, are proud to bring you Election 2014, Wyoming's Primary Choices.
This is Wyoming PBS, and you're watching Election 2014, Wyoming's Primary Choices. This round featuring two candidates for the Republican nomination to run for state treasurer. It's worth noting that there currently are no Democrats filed for this office, which makes this primary race even more significant. I'm Jeff O'Gara with Wyoming PBS, and with me in the studio is Stephanie Joyce. She's a reporter who covers energy issues for Wyoming Public Media. So welcome to you, and welcome to you folks. I'll say a little bit about the Office of State Treasurer. It's one of the 5 statewide elected offices in Wyoming. The treasurer manages the state's considerable assets, counting in the tens of billions now, and also serves on a number of important decision-making boards. So let's take this opportunity to meet the 2 Republicans who are asking for your support. Then we'll go over the rules and we'll start the debate. Mark Gordon was appointed Wyoming State Treasurer by Governor Matt Mead in 2012 after the death in office of Treasurer Joe Meyer. He previously served on the State Environmental Quality Council and was director of the Federal Reserve Bank in Kansas City. He owns and manages ranches in Johnson County and has served on the Johnson County School Board, the Wyoming Nature Conservancy Board, and the Wyoming Stock Growers Tax Committee. Welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. Good to be here.
Ron Radu grew up on a small farm in California and earned a degree in technical arts from Cal Poly. He worked as an auditor for the state of California, then worked in the Workers' Compensation Division of the Wyoming State Treasurer's Office. He has also been employed as a safety consultant and a U.S. patent agent. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yep. So, some rules. We've drawn straws to determine the order candidates' answers to the first questions and their closing statements. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to answer a question, and then the first to answer will be allowed a 20-second rebuttal. Keep an eye on the time down here, the lights, the amber, red, green lights. They're going to signal when you need to wrap up an answer to a question. We'll also have a short lightning round where we do quick answers to words and phrases that Stephanie and I will call out. An issue, a name, a bit of Wyoming government history, something of that sort, but nothing tricky. Finally, you'll each have a minute and a half at the end of the debate for a closing statement. So, we'll get underway. We start with a fairly straightforward question that probably doesn't require a rebuttal on this one.
And we'll start with you, Mr. Radu. Help our viewers out by describing what a treasurer in Wyoming does and what makes you more qualified than your opponent to do the job.
There's several different ways of looking at that. One is that you have to really protect the corpus of the funds and try to get a good return, but mainly you have to be concerned about the safety of the money and make sure it's handled properly. And because I have a lot of auditing experience, I feel that would be extremely helpful with a lot of the duties of the state treasurer.
Mr. Gordon.
Well, thank you. I've learned a lot in my year and a half as state treasurer, and it's called upon my experience in ranching and building small businesses on main streets of Buffalo and Sheridan to Fortune 500 company executive. And I think that's the reason my wife suggested that I step forward to see if I could help the state. The job of treasurer really requires a broad experience in the state, from small businesses to little communities to large industrial enterprises. And so with that experience, my time on the Environmental Quality Council, all of that rounds me out pretty well for this job. Everything that my opponent has said is absolutely true, and I have that institutional investment background.
Okay. Our next question will begin with Mark Gordon. If we all know a little Wyoming history, we know it wasn't all that long ago that in the 1960s that Governor Stan Hathaway declared the state broke. But there's a lot of money in the state coffers now, and the treasurer has to manage a big portion of it. What does Wyoming have set aside these days? Is it the right amount? And how should it be invested and managed in the face of a potential downturn in the economy?
Well, I think that's a very good question, Jeff, because one of the big issues we've got is an administration in Washington that is dead set against our coal. They want to change our carbon economy, and that is going to be a big problem for the state. Already we've seen coal lease bonuses that have gone unbid, which means that we're going to have a zero return coming in a few years' time. Why that's important for the state is because we do have to take a year's potential budget into account. So we have about $1.8 billion right now that is set aside in a rainy day account. One of the things I'd like to do is to be able to make that work more for the state, to be able to help it during this soft patch that we're going to go through. Ron
Radu.
Yeah, I agree that there are going to be some soft patches ahead, and the 1.38 billion rainy day fund maybe could be a little bit larger to help out, but the thing to do is always be cautious. And like one of the things I follow is Charles Schwab's recommendations. If he made an extreme comment like the market's going to collapse in a month, then I get out.
You can finish a sentence.
Get out. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have a rebuttal?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. We do give you a 20-second rebuttal.
No, I think prudence is absolutely required. You know, at our size, it's very important that we have a well-diversified economic portfolio.
Both of you brought up the rainy day fund. Wyoming has put aside more than $7 billion in various rainy day funds, including the $1.7 billion so-called legislative stabilization reserve. Is the current strategy for managing that money appropriate? And we'll start that with Mr. Radu.
Well, I feel that the legislature should be the first to really look into it and try to assign things. But I don't know. You know, you can say it could be done differently by the state land investment board or state loan and investment board making recommendations and sending them to the legislature. But I wouldn't know where it should be changed from the way it is.
Mr. Gordon.
Well, Article 16, Section 6 of our Constitution prohibits the general funds from being invested in anything but bonds, fixed income instruments, with the exception of permanent funds like the Hathaway and the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund and the pension funds. So one of the things that I took up this year was the opportunity to see if we could work with the legislature, and we have begun to work with the legislature to craft the statutory language to be able to deploy those funds that are set aside but can't be invested more broadly in what I'm going to call constitutional funds that will take to the voters in what it would be in 2016. And with that, we'll be able to get a better investment return. We'll be more prudent, and we won't be stuck with what the Federal Reserve is doing with our interest rates.
Mr. Radu, do you have a rebuttal?
I would basically agree with most of what he said. It's just, I think I'm a little more cautious. I wouldn't, for example, have money invested in foreign stocks, because in 1996, when the voters...
You can finish your sentence.
They only wanted domestic stock at that time.
This question will go first to Mark Gordon. How much is Wyoming paying outside consultants to advise and manage our billions in investments? And do we have any in-house economists who could also be guiding this wealth? As treasurer, would you favor continuing in the manner we're doing it now, or should Wyoming change its staffing arrangement to guide investments?
That's a complicated question, but let me tell you a little bit about what we've been up to. The state currently spends in outside fees about $22 million. There's about twice that much that's absorbed with deductions from the investment managers as we go, so about $40 million. That's a big sum. There has been a lot of talk about bringing somebody in-house. The pension fund already does that. We've been comparing both models and trying to figure out a way for the future. What I will say is that Wyoming's investment fund has grown remarkably, as you know, over the last several years. Just 10 years ago, it was around $5 billion. It's now upwards of $18 billion. And that brings an institutional sophistication that's necessary. But at the same time, it is Wyoming, and we need to make sure it's accessible for the people of Wyoming.
Mr. Rado.
Well, there are changes that could be made. For example, when some new investment managers come to the door, instead of giving them the money, you could give it to some big brokerage house like Charles Schwab and let them be the custodians of the funds.
This next round of questions, we'll start with you, Mr. Radu.
We do have a rebuttal if you'd like to give one.
Sure.
Rebuttal.
No, I'd love to.
Sure.
I think Mr. Radu makes a good point. However, institutional investing is very different from personal trading. And in our case, we're number 57 in the world of sovereign wealth funds at this size. We're up in the range of Abu Dhabi and other funds of that size. So we really do need to have top-notch investment advice from a multitude of advisors.
We'll start this next round with you, Mr. Radu. During the term of your predecessor, Joe Meyer, state investments took a huge hit with the economic downturn in 2009. And the Treasurer then made some major adjustments in investment strategy. And much of the value of those state investments has been recovered. How regularly should the Treasurer reevaluate investment strategies?
Every quarter, I would say. But going back to when they took that big loss, they changed the method of reporting, and they used to take gains minus losses and give you the net gain, but now they give you the gain and they take the losses out of the permanent funds, and it makes the gains look a little bigger than they really are. And I feel that they should present both models. They should tell you, well, this is the way it is by the new system, and this is the way it was before they changed it. In other words, it's legal to change it, but it makes it confusing comparing 2006 with current year.
Mr. Gordon.
One of the great things for Wyoming is that we have a very long-term perspective. Our funds, the management mandate is to safeguard the corpus and make sure we don't lose money. That's kind of hard to do, you know, from time to time. My predecessor, Joe Meyer, changed that policy of recognizing losses over time. What the advantage was for the state, because we had that long view, is we could get back in the market when it had dropped, be able to purchase at a pretty reasonable rate some securities that we made back our money within a year's time. It's a very important tool for us in the state of Wyoming, and I think the most important thing to remember is we are not market timers. Our particular motivation is to make sure the long term of the state is safeguarded. Thank you.
Mr. Radu, you have a 20-second rebuttal if you'd like.
Yes, I'd say that the main point is the safety of the funds and trying to deal with that always as a first thing to do. But I have no other rebuttal. Yeah.
So this question begins with Mark Gordon. As treasurer, you're going to sit on seven state boards with very different responsibilities, including the Community Development Board, the State Loan and Investment Board, and more. What board duties of the treasurer do you think are most important, and how do you and would you approach them?
You're saying 4 duties?
No, what boards do you consider most important, and how would you approach your duties on them?
Boy, I have to tell you, I try to do every one of the boards that I can, but the ones that obviously have the most impact for the state are the State Loan and Investment Board, the State Board of Land Commissioners, two that the Treasurer has uniquely that I take an extra special care for are the Wyoming Community Development Association and especially the Retirement Fund. The Retirement Fund is a critical need for the state of Wyoming, and working with several other colleagues, I think we've made some big improvements in that whole program.
Mr. Radu.
Yes, I think the State Loan and Investment Board is the main one that the action needs to be taken with. And I personally don't believe in the Wyoming Business Council picking corporations to give money to. In other words, like Microsoft or some of these other companies probably would have come to Wyoming regardless of what the Business Council was doing. And I don't think that the state should be giving large corporations money, increasing their profit margins. But as far as like the Land Commission, I would find that important too, but I would probably choose the scenic value over the economic value in a lot of cases, making decisions.
Okay. You have a rebuttal, Mr. Gordon?
Well, two things. The last statement that my opponent made, Mr. Radu, we really can't do that because our job with the state lands is to return as much as we can for the school system. But within that, I guess I understand exactly what you're saying. The other point that I guess I'd like to make is that, well, go ahead. I know I'm out of time. Thanks.
You can ask one more question.
Yeah, so we'll start with Mr. Gordon. As treasurer, you obviously do have the chance on the State Land Loans and Investment Board to invest money in helping recruit and grow businesses in the state. And there's talk about a big energy complex like the Heartland Complex in Alberta coming here to Wyoming. That would obviously require a huge investment in infrastructure and a major alteration of the Wyoming landscape. Do you support that sort of venture?
I need to know more about it. But one of the things that Mr. Radu said just a second ago was about the Business Council, and the point I was going to make is the Treasurer doesn't serve on that. However, the Auditor and the Treasurer have both spent more time trying to work with the Business Council and understand what they are supposed to do. You may know that last year, with some of my leadership, we were able to pass a bill which will allow the state to loan, not give, but loan money at appropriate levels with returns and all the kinds of collateral and risk premia that we should have to institutions like that. Do I support it? I'd have to know more about it. I worry a lot that we have for years in this state thought about let's build a great big institutional thing, and it never really seems to come to fruition.
Mr. Radu.
Yes, that's true. A lot of things happen that the 5 state officials do not have any influence on. This wind turbine, they're trying to make the biggest one in the United States. I don't believe that any of the state boards are involved in that decision process, at least from what I've heard about it, that it's a separate group decided to approve it. And I would like to know more about that, but I'm not the one asking questions, so I'll let that be the end of my answer.
After we're off the air, you can ask us questions. That'll be fun. We're going to go to what we think of as the fun part. You guys may not. It's the lightning round, where we're going to throw out some words and phrases, ask you to respond to them. We may say something like national debt or the Wyoming Business Council, which we just talked about. And you all will get 15 seconds to react. There's just going to be a few of these, and then we'll go back and we'll go back to your closing statements at the end of this debate. You want to start these off?
Absolutely. The Craig Report. We'll start with Mr. Gordon.
What legislators depend on for their financial information.
Better than 15 seconds.
Yes, that's a good, still red light.
Don't worry about that red
okay.
light. Just
they don't create the numbers. They just make estimates based on the numbers that are given to them. So they do a real good job, but still partly it's somebody else's numbers.
Mr. Radu, this will go to you first. The Permanent Mineral Trust Fund.
That's the most talked about one. It's about $6 billion possibly. I forgot what the number is, but it's the one that most people talk about, and it has other funds in it, like for the schools.
Okay, but you can always finish the sentence. Mr. Gordon.
It's Wyoming's nest egg. It's true renewable resource for the future.
Man, he's good. Way under 15 seconds.
We'll start this one with you, Mr. Gordon. Teapot Dome.
Teapot Dome, boy, what a history we've had. I used to drive by it, so that's what it brings up to me as my trip to Casper every day. But it's a historic monument for the state.
Mr. Radu.
Yeah, I know it's way up north, and I believe I don't know if they slant drilled to get into the reserve, but certain people were taking oil out of there that didn't have any right to it. That's all I know about it.
Big scandal back in the day, but a long time ago.
Yeah.
Ron Radu, this question goes to you. Magpul Industries.
That is a gun manufacturer in Colorado that's moving out of the state. They decided to move out of Colorado because of the voters approving anti-gun rules, and I don't know what that was exactly, but they didn't. Okay. Yeah.
Mark Gordon.
It's the reason the auditor and I decided to start visiting the Business Council so we could make this program work better for the state.
Okay.
Mr. Gordon, Dodd-Frank.
Dodd-Frank is a ridiculous set of regulations that are hurting community banks at the expense of consumers and favoring larger institutions. It's part of the Obama mandate.
Mr. Radu.
I've read a little bit about that, and I've never read anything positive about it. It's like it was supposed to be reforming things, but they're actually just creating red tape and problems for a lot of people.
Okay. Yale Plan for Investment. Is that a familiar term? Let's skip right
Yale?
over it. Mm-hmm. The Yale Plan?
Oh, Yale Plan.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
I've heard of the name, but I don't know exactly what it's involved.
We'll give you a quick shot at that, Mr. Gordon.
It's David Swenson's book that he published back in the early 2000s to talk about endowments and a well-diversified, non-correlated portfolio.
Okay.
Mr. Gordon, the Great Recession.
Great Recession. That was the buildup of a lot of frenzy about economic good times in the country that resulted in the collapse of several institutions and Dodd-Frank, the crafting of Dodd-Frank.
Yes, it was something that could have ended after a few years, but because of several different factors, it went on, and a lot of people claim World War II was what ended the Great Depression, but I'll let that go.
We're not shooting for that now.
No.
Well, we drew straws earlier this evening to decide who would go first with the closing statements, and we're at that point now. We're all done with that lightning round. We're going to move on to the closing, the finish line. Ron Radu, you have the first closing statement.
Oh, okay. A lot of my experience is extremely dated. Like the 11 years I worked in California, the first 6 were under Governor Reagan, who I never met, but he had really good people train me in the auditing, and I got a lot of experience out in the field as well as in the state. But what I also learned from patent work, I learned how to read the law and understand things, and I recognize that there's statutes that I feel are pretty poor, like on investment managers. There's a requirement for audited financial statements for prospective investment managers, but there's nothing in that section requiring audits after they get the money. And I'd like to see that statute improved to include clear, effective auditing of the investment managers. It requires only that they make reports quarterly. And there's other things in there that, like if you have traditional investments, you have to meet the Investors Act of 1940, be registered under it. But if you're in alternative assets, which are private equity, you don't have to be registered under that or anything else. And I'm thinking it should at least meet the same requirement as traditional investments.
Okay, thank you. Mark Gordon.
Well, thank you, Stephanie and Jeff, Wyoming Public Radio and TV, for your thoughtful questions. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in tonight. Thank you, too, Mr. Radu, for stepping forward again as a Republican this time for this office. The Treasurer's Office really, as we've talked about, safeguards all the funds of the state. It's very important for the economic future of this state. And I've taken that job very, very seriously. I want to make sure we have the best, most prudent decisions for our investments as we go forward. On the other aspects of the job, I want to say that we've made improvement. We've gotten more efficient in the office, and we've begun to work across a spectrum with our colleagues in the State Loan and Investment Board. The other thing I want to say is that I've traveled to 23 counties, and during that time I visited Midwest and Kemmerer to understand what those communities need. I want to make sure that the state does right by our communities. So you know what I've done, you know what I want to do, and I guess the last thing I'd like to do is to thank my family. I'm very proud of them, and I love them all. So I guess if you think what I've done over the last few years has been worthwhile, please consider returning me to the office on the 19th. Thank you.
Well, to both of our candidates, Ron Radu, Mark Gordon, I want to thank you for spending the evening with us here and participating in this debate.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yep.
I really appreciate it.
Great. Well, it's all the time we've got, and we do have to close up shop here, so I'm going to say goodnight. I'm Jeff O'Gara. Stephanie Joyce has been here with me working away, and there is a hard-working crew that you never see behind the cameras back in the control room. We thank them as well. Wyoming PBS has a full lineup of primary debates this week, so stay tuned and stay informed. Put your mark on the ballot August 19th or sooner if you want to vote absentee. You exercise that right, you make your vote count, and have a good night.
For more information on this and other local programs, visit our website.
Join Wyoming PBS Tuesday